Thank you, Patrick. Secretary Audrey, will you please call the roll?
Sure. Director Anderson?
Here.
Director Buchanan?
Here.
Director Colson?
Here.
Director DeWitt?
Here.
Director Durrani?
Here.
Director Frega?
Here.
Director Fuentes?
Here.
Director Higgins?
Here.
Director Hobson?
Here.
Director Lewis?
Present.
Director McGallis?
Here.
Director Melvin?
Here.
Director Payne?
Here.
Director Ross?
Here.
Director Triani?
Here.
Chairman Dillard?
Here.
We have a quorum of 16 present and no absent.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Before we get into our regular agenda, I want to welcome someone who I've known for quite a while, even though he's just a relatively young man, and that's new director, Ryan Higgins. Ryan is a lawyer at McDermott, great law firm, and somebody that I've seen operate in a number of capacities. And it's also, I was kidding Ryan, I said it's great to actually have a millennial on our, we talk about millennials and young people and their ridership ideas and needs, but it's great to have you here, Director Higgins, and we really welcome you to the board, and I think you'll find this service, like we all do here, very satisfying, and I couldn't have chosen a better new director, if I was given an entire menu. So welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to working with the rest of the board.
Thank you so much. And he's actually dug in, been thinking, so he from the get-go has talked to Leanne and the staff, and you'll be a great new addition. And you have big shoes to fill. Don Totten was a longtime member of the RTA, former state senator, and but we'll miss Director Totten, but you are just an excellent new addition. So thank you. Moving along on our agenda is item 3A, which is the approval of the minutes from the meeting held on September 15th of 2016. Any comments or questions on those? If not, may I have a motion and a second to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Director Fuentes moves that we approve the minutes from September 15th, seconded by Director Buchanan. Madam Secretary, why don't you take a roll call on that so we've got a baseline roll call?
All righty. Director Anderson?
Yes.
Director Buchanan?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Yes.
Director DeWitt?
Yes.
Director Durrani?
Yes.
Director Frega?
Aye.
Director Fuentes?
Aye.
Director Higgins?
Aye.
Director Hobson?
Yes.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director McGallis?
Yes.
Director Melvin?
Yes.
Director Payne?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Triani?
Yes.
Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
16 ayes.
Thank you, and as always, I thank the board for their tremendous attendance, and even those who are not members of committees. I thank you all for coming in early and attending the committee meetings. I applaud you for your dedicated attendance. Next is item 5, and actually item 4, which is a public comment section. We have no scheduled speakers for the public comment section today. And item 5 is the Executive Director's report. Leanne Redden. Leanne?
Morning. I will begin where I always begin, with the status of the state delinquency. As of September 30th, the delinquency was $269.7 million. To track what that is costing us in terms of carrying that debt and solvency for the service boards, to date it has been totaling $2.5 million in expenses for us to carry that and float that money. So moving to Washington, not a lot going on in Washington. September, October was focused on finalizing the details on the continuing resolution, basically to keep the government running through December 9th. A couple of other little things to note. At the end of September, Politico's morning transportation publication also covered Getting America to Work letter to the Senate Banking and House Transportation Committees, really focusing on calling for the FAST Act as only the first step in really bringing our and funding our nation's infrastructure and bringing it to a state of good repair. So in other words, keep your eye on the long game, if you will. On October 6th, the Hills Congress blog also published an op-ed from me The opinion piece highlighted the positive economic impact that transit has, and the really more specifically the investment of infrastructure and how that impacts our economy, not just here but across the nation, and calling on Congress and the new administration to make infrastructure investment top priority for its first 100 days. So the theme of my next couple of slides, I think, is this shared mobility concept, which we've actually has come up a couple of times already this morning in terms of how we play in this shared mobility ecosystem. Staff had been very active in this space over the last month or two, exploring really how transit works in and with the car sharing discussion of the Ubers, the Lyfts, the bike sharing, and all these other new transportation options that are really proliferating the landscape as today. So in 2016, DuPage enlisted RTA and our staff planning expertise to help with a transit connectivity study, which really was intended to look at and highlight and provide recommendations to improve those last mile connections in a suburban environment. Their key employment corridors across the county. In September, as part of that study, the RTA hosted with DuPage County and Choose DuPage, which is their Chamber of Commerce Economic Development Group, at the John Noel Transit Conference. It was a workshop format this year to explore the potential of new partnerships to help solve the last mile problem in DuPage. The chairman provided opening remarks to kick off that one-day session. And RTA staff presented findings of a review of our analysis with our partners in DuPage and really looked at the examination of where there is potential for those greater connections with transit. Representatives from what we call the transportation network companies, so the Uber, Lyft, Zipcar, Getaround, and Zagstar, that's a new one for me, engaged with DuPage municipalities, corporations, and property developers to better understand those interrelationships and those mobility needs. And DuPage now plans as a county to follow up with all those interested parties from the conference and really find ways to test these connections, these partnerships, and how we can improve mobility across the county. Again, shared mobility. Earlier this week, we were pleased to participate in a shared mobility conference at the national level with the Shared Use Mobility Center's annual summit that was actually held here in Chicago. I gave welcoming remarks. We had some staff attend the full, couple of day session. And the summit ended yesterday, and really I think what was interesting about that, it presents an opportunity for not just the transit and the public sector guys to be together, but to really try to develop those relationships and those connections between some of the people who are working very hard in that private sector space to really kind of keep those conversations advancing and looking for opportunities to enhance and expand our mobility. November 15th, coming up next month, the RTA, in collaboration with CTA, Metra, PACE, IDOT, and the Tollway, will once again host the 19th Annual Transportation Symposium and Business Exchange. For those of you who remember, that is a effort focused on disadvantaged business enterprises, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, veteran small-owned businesses, and just generally small businesses, as a way to really give them the opportunity to learn about contracting opportunities across all the public sector transportation agencies in our region. We are on point. We actually host all of them for the region. The event will be held at the Chicago Cultural Center at 79 East Washington from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. on the 15th. There'll be networking sessions, workshops, so it's very hands-on and applied for these smaller businesses to create those connections and better understand how they can overcome obstacles and build capacity, find resources to grow their businesses in our contracting space. Opening remarks will begin at 9:15, followed by a keynote address from Michael Sutton, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Infrastructure Engineering, Inc. Board members and staff are invited to attend, so if anybody is interested in joining us, I certainly will be there. Perhaps the chairman might be joining me and as we kick that off, but if you want more information, we're happy to give that to you.
And Governor Rauner was there last year.
Correct.
And spoke. It's if you are interested, it's a great event. and in a great venue, if nothing else, as well.
And this one's at the Chicago Cultural Center, not the South Shore Cultural
Sorry,
Center last year.
that's
That was a beautiful place also, but it
great
was
venue, too.
on the heels of a really horrible storm, and it took everybody forever to get there, which is what I recall from the day, because I couldn't take transit. Okay, we are in the thick of the budget preparation season, which means we are approaching the budget hearing season. So this is a summary of the scheduled public hearings for the preparation of the 2017 budgets. I think most of you have been notified of these, and we have signed you up to help us and support us as we do those in your local area. So I look forward to doing that. Once again, this year we will be jointly hosting those hearings with Metra. They all run from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. We actually will culminate the series of hearings that we do with Metra with a final last meeting after the Special Finance Committee on November 30th, where we will present sort of the consolidated overall budget for the region. That one is in this room and will also run from 4 to 6 p.m. And we'll send out a reminder of those specific details as we get a little closer. And then the final piece that I just wanted to remind people of, we also are required to give presentations to each of the county boards across our region, and we will do that on these appropriate dates. If I believe Audrey has shared that information with you also. If any of you are interested or want additional information, just let us know, and we are more than happy to have. I know some of you have already signed up to join us for those presentations. With that, that concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Leanne? Okay. Well, scot-free today, which is good, I think. Thank you. Thank you, Leanne. Item 7 is the, I guess it's the approval now. Actually, we're still on 6, aren't we not? Yep. So item 6 is the presentation and on the RTA availability study and FTA triennial DBE goal assessment. Ms. Holt, welcome. Welcome.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much. I will try to be brief. Nadine is telling me, oh, you want to talk
Intro.
first?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
please.
Give you your due, Colette. Good morning, directors. As you know, as recipients of federal transportation funds, we're required to maintain an FTA-approved DBE program, and that program requires that we submit a triennial DBE goal. That goal is due in about a month. You might recall also that the board approved a contract for Colette Holt and Associates to conduct an availability study on our behalf to provide the statistical basis for our DBE goal and for our new MWSDVOB goal as well. That was a mouthful. I had to write that down. This item will not require any board action today, but we are here to cover 2 separate but related matters. We like to pinch a penny, so we didn't want to have Colette come out more than once, so we thought we'd cover 2 important and required items at the same time. So just because it might be a little bit confusing, I thought I'd start by giving you a brief overview of what we'll be covering, and then I'll let Colette take it from there. First, we'll start with the DBE goal public participation process, which is required by federal regs. They require that we have a public participation process in conjunction with setting our triennial goal. This hearing today will serve as one opportunity for the public to address the proposed goal and methodology for arriving at that goal, which are published currently on our website. The public comment period will end on November 15th, at which time we will submit our goal to the FTA. Comments are welcome today, in person, via email to our regulatory compliance officer, Latoya Red, who's right there, and via comment card today. So we had some comment cards out on the table, and we also specifically invited a lot of members of the business community to come and speak with you today if they had any feelings about the DBE goal and how we set that goal. And we can also receive any comments via U.S. mail. Today, I believe we're going to be suspending the usual rules that we have associated with public comments. So we won't have that bright flashing 3-minute, countdown on the board screens that you normally see when we have public comments. In conjunction with her work on the study, Colette has assisted us in preparing the goal. She will explain the process, and then she will allow any business representatives who wish to do so to provide the board with thoughts on the goal and methodology for arriving at it. Then we will turn back to Colette for the second portion of the agenda item, which is an update on the availability study itself. When Colette was here last, and I think that was in March maybe, our study was just underway, and she explained the purpose of the study and the process for conducting it. We promised you then that she would return to report on her findings and her recommendations, and we thought it made the most sense to have her just come in here the one time. You might recall that Colette is literally the nation's preeminent expert in this area. She's been practicing law for over 30 years, I think, and more than 20 years in this. Sorry.
Did you really have to say that?
And more than 20 years in this specific practice area. Before I turn it over to Colette, I did also want to put in a plug for all the PMs on the RTA staff who did really a lot of work to help move the study along. It's a lot of extra work in digging into the details of how we spend our money, why we spend it the way we spend it, what our coming projects are going to be for the next 3 years. So I do want to specifically thank them for their help. And with all that, I will turn it over to Colette.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And yes, let me echo Nadine's thanks to the project managers. We went back to them. They provided us with additional information. They helped us contact your prime vendors when they were non-responsive, and they really, really did step up in ways that I don't often see from an agency, so that was really quite wonderful. One of our recommendations for the study will be to get yourselves a data collection system so that we don't have to trouble these people like this in the future, but they absolutely did step up. Brief overview of the FTA goal-setting standards, which is a recipient of federal transportation funds the RTA must adhere to. You have to set a goal for disadvantaged business enterprise participation every 3 years. Back in the day, it was every year, but mercifully now it's only every 3 years. That process is governed by federal regulations, as Nadine explained. The U.S. DOT has tips for goal setting, lots of trainings and guidance, and the work that we did falls squarely within those parameters. We also suggest people look at the National Academy of Sciences directions on how to conduct a defensible study for these types of programs. And of course, we must meet the federal case law that's applicable here in the Seventh Circuit. So the proposed goal that will be submitted to FTA was based on our work on the 2016 availability study. And FTA goal setting requires a two-step process. The first is to determine a basic head count of who's out there. What's the availability of women and minority-owned firms in the RTA's geographic markets and in the industries in which it purchases. This is a relatively specialized agency, and you certainly do buy pens and pencils, but not with FTA money. And so there was really a very small pool of contracts that you awarded during the study period. We found that your six-county service region was, in fact, your market area, so that's good. There's congruence between the people you serve and the people you buy from. And that there were only 8 industry codes. NAICS stands for North American Industry Classification System, which is developed by the U.S. Census and is the industry rubric that the FTA requires us to use for goal setting. But because you are so specialized, you only had 8 industry codes in which you spent federal money. So once we did that, we looked at the utilization of DBEs by RTA on its federally assisted contracts, and that was about 6% over the course of the study period. Availability was actually much higher than that, about 15% or so, and so for the future going forward, we're hoping that RTA will be able to expend more dollars with minority and women firms. But again, let me point out that there were 5 contracts in the study period, and so that's kind of the luck of what comes. And it's not Metro, it's not CTA where you're going to put out dozens and dozens every year, and so this just was the artifact of what you actually spent. So the second step of goal setting, once you have your step 1 head count, is to make any kind of adjustments to that. This is sometimes called a but-for adjustment, as in but-for discrimination, what would the availability of women and minority-owned firms be? And the U.S. DOT guidance requires us to measure that partly by the capacity of DBEs in the market area, which is measured by your utilization of those DBEs, and evidence from your availability study, and anything else that's out there, information about bonding or financing, employment, education, anything else that might impact the ability of women and minorities to form firms and then to be successful in the firms that they form. However, recent DOT amendments to the regulations really now caution that if you want to make an adjustment, it has to be based on quantifiable, demonstrable evidence that's related to the adjustment that you make. This is kind of government bureaucrats, lawyers speak for if you really aren't positive about that number, don't do it. And in fact, that has really been the trend, which is agencies are taking their step one head count. They are averaging that with their past utilization, making that adjustment, and that's what we did here. Also note that in this circuit, in the Seventh Circuit, that we have some pretty restrictive case law that says that if you set goals on affirmative action programs, they need to be at the plausible lower bound estimate. So that was another reason why we chose not to try to adjust this number based on employment data or union apprenticeship data or that kind of thing. So you see when we added our availability number with your past participation number, we have a proposed DBE goal for the next 3 years of 11.38%. The next step, sort of the third step in goal setting that the FTA requires, is for you to estimate the portion of the goal that you're going to meet using race-neutral measures, things like outreach, unbundling, those kinds of things, versus actually setting contract goals. And that means DBE goals on specific contracts. And the way that you do this is you take a look at what you've achieved solely through race-neutral measures over some period, usually at least 3 years. We looked at 4. And the RTA has achieved all of its DBE participation through the use of contract goals. This is not surprising. Certainly people told us in the availability study interviews that the goals are critical to their ability to get business. So this was to be expected, that goals were the mechanism that you use successfully to make sure that your contracting process is inclusive. And so that was 0. So you add that and average that with any other number, and you get the same number you had. So we expect that we will get 11.38% of the goal through contract goals, and we don't anticipate getting any DBE participation solely through race-neutral measures. Do want to note, though, that you do engage in several race-neutral types of activities that are helpful and certainly should be continued. One of them, as the executive director pointed out to you, is the Transit Symposium next month. Please do come. I'll be there, and it's always a great event, and it's a way for DBEs to introduce themselves to you, to your staff, and make those networking connections that are so critical to being successful. You also have one-on-one meetings with DBEs if they request it, to go over their proposals and explain how they might do better next time or increase their capacities. You do specific outreach to women and minority-owned firms on particular solicitations to make sure that they know about them. And you work with the other organizations, the assist agencies like Federation of Women Contractors, Black Contractors United, et cetera, to make sure that their membership understands about access to RTA opportunities. As Nadine also mentioned, there is a public consultation requirement from the FTA. This presentation today, this meeting, and the public comment period that's immediately going to follow it are part of the required consultation. RTA is also required to post the goal, make that accessible to the public, and consult with various stakeholder groups, which we've done, and then, as Nadine also mentioned, publish the goal for public comment. So that concludes my presentation about the goal-setting submission for FTA, and I'm happy to take questions, and I know we have some people that are, I think, waiting to make some public comments. Okay, yeah, because I think some folks may need to leave. Oh, Beth. Beth is here.
Hi, Beth.
No problem. lot of familiar faces. My name is Beth Doria. I'm the Executive Director of the Federation of Women Contractors, and thank you for the opportunity to briefly talk with you today. I've been involved with my organization for 15 years. We have been fierce advocates for DBE and MWBE programs throughout the state throughout that entire time. I did just, in reviewing this submission, I did see where the DBE utilization in the year 2015, it appears there was a 34.8% overall DBE utilization. I am almost having to assume that that was some large contract that was let that was not normal. But I just wanted to get some clarification on what that might be. And also just one other suggestion. We do have a group of top executives who meet. It's called the GPC Forum. GPC stands for Government Procurement and Compliance. We have been meeting for several years now. It is comprised of every single state agency as well as local agency. As I mentioned, top executives, we get together on a monthly basis. We go over critical issues, and the basis of it is that we are trying to standardize procedures throughout and across all government entities in as much as we possibly can, including form submission, submission of good faith efforts, waivers, things of that nature. I would highly recommend that RTA have a representative on that forum. I think it would be a very, very good vehicle to keep someone in the loop of what we are all doing on an ongoing basis. So with that, I want to say that I strongly support the RTA submission and keep up the good work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks, Ms. Doria.
It was, and I'm getting too old now and just remember things off the top of my head. So I need to go and look back in the data. But my recollection is that was one contract that I think a DBE won as a prime vendor.
That's right.
Which is wonderful. That's what we want to see. But again, because you don't put out a lot of federally assisted contracts, you can get these spikes. I mean, as a data person, 5 is a small number of contracts, so you can see some anomalies. But that was great. And certainly one of the things that I know you all have been striving to do is to get DBE more opportunities to be prime vendors with you, as opposed to only serving as subconsultants or subcontractors. So that's a good effort.
Kirk
Just
Toulouse.
for the record, your work was limited to the RTA only, not the service agencies. Is
That's
that correct?
We already did PACE and Metra. We haven't done CTA, although we're about to start a big goal-setting project for them. So yes, this was strictly your contracts that you procured yourselves, as opposed to even funded somebody else and they procured the contract.
Director Friga.
There's a DBE goal that the federal government has set, which the RTA tries to live within. There's also a state requirement of a 3% set aside for veteran-owned small businesses. That goal is completely ignored by most people in the state. The only people that really put their butts on the line were the vets. Many of them served 3 years, 6 years, 20 years, and we're not giving them anything. For the most part, it's the set-aside is ignored, except for the University of Illinois, which honors it. The Illinois Tollway honors it to a degree. They set aside a half of 1% or 1% for set-asides for vets, which doesn't even open the door many times. I'm wondering, is the RTA looking to participate in the state program?
I'll address that. With regard to the state's program, obviously it doesn't apply to us directly, but this board did approve the RTA putting together an MWSD-VOB program a couple years back. And we've done a couple things to try to implement that. Number one, there aren't a lot of veteran-owned firms that are registered with the state program, but the ones who are registered, we do send them our solicitations to make sure that they're aware that we're procuring certain services. We have had some participation. I don't have the numbers right here with me, but I can get those numbers for you in terms of veteran-owned participation. I think we had a couple firms, a couple contracts last year with veteran-owned firms. Number two, Colette is going to address with the next part of her briefing what she did with the availability study, which covered minority and women-owned firms, but also service-disabled veteran-owned firms. So we're going to talk a little bit about that briefly in a moment.
Nadine, this may be, I just want to make sure I got this right. So when we say contracts that are federally assisted, are there other contracts that aren't and wouldn't be covered by this goal?
Let me explain how we've operated the program in the past. We have a very, as Colette mentioned, a very, very small pool of federally assisted contracts. And I guess in the last year we only had, or over the study period, we only had 5 contracts. The vast majority of our contracts are paid through RTA funds, so no federal dollars involved. We are required by the RTA Act to have a DBE-like program for our state-funded contracts. And so what we've done up to now is we've just applied the DBE program to those state-funded contracts as well. So we've been putting DBE goals on federally and non-federally funded contracts. That's gotten us pretty decent results over the years, as Colette mentioned earlier, but we'd like to do better, which is why we're also going to add the MWSD-VOB component to that for state-funded only contracts. I know it's a little bit confusing, but we think we'll have a greater pool of participants if we also include folks who are certified by the city, the county, the state. I think that's all we're going to cover for now.
So when we think about it, holistically, and not try to make that distinction, what percentage would we be looking at, and how does that translate to dollars?
Colette's going to get into that a little bit. I mean, there are obviously stringent requirements that we have to follow with regard to the DBE goal and how that's set. The MWBE goal, you're going to have a little bit more latitude. She is going to make a recommendation based on the data, but she is going to get into that a little bit when she talks about her findings with the study.
Okay, and then when we talk about it in terms of percentages, just translate that to dollars for me.
Okay, I don't know if we have our full spend dollars here today, but I can definitely get you that data.
Any other questions of Colette here? Part two. Right.
Okay, well, actually, that was a perfect segue to what I'm going to talk about now, which is both your federally assisted dollars as well as your non-federal aid dollars that we studied both in the study. So, and some of you saw this once before, but I will never miss a chance if I can to remind folks of why you're doing this. Why did you engage in this expensive and time-consuming process to have a study? And really, we really had 3 objectives here. The first one is to provide you with evidence and to meet the legal principles for a study. We certainly did meet all the FTA requirements, and we do believe that should you be challenged about your program, that our disparity study met these basic legal principles. Evidence comports with the case law and solid social science, economics, and statistics. The program that you have is tightly woven to the evidence that you had. We met the FTA requirements, and we are pretty confident that if you were to be sued, that you could survive a legal challenge. So the objectives of the study really were, again, to provide you with defense, to provide you with recommendations and the goal-setting document that I talked about in part 1, and to use the study to be kind of an educational tool for you, for other stakeholders, policy people so that folks can understand what we did. We try to write in reasonably plain English. You have lawyers and statisticians together. That can be pretty grim, but hopefully it's reasonably accessible to people. These were the elements that went into the study, and you see these in the various chapters in the final draft. These are the elements that the courts really have required us to go through in order to have a defensible program. So what did we find? We found that there were 8 NAICS codes that made up your market for your FTA utilization, and as well as your non-FTA utilization. And you'll see there, again, this is a little bit repetitive of the first presentation, but the first presentation is going to FTA as part of the packet, so we had to make sure it covered everything. So I apologize for a little bit of redundancy. But on your non-federally assisted contracts that I think you were just asking about, you achieved almost 20% there. And again, it's because it's a broader array of things that you buy than just on your federally assisted contracts. You see there what we found was the availability was actually a little bit less for your non-federal aid funds than for your federally assisted contracts, but it's still in the approximate 14% range, which is about what you'd expect to see in a community with this demographic. So in addition to that statistical evidence, we looked at evidence throughout the economy about opportunities for women and minorities, and not surprisingly, outside of your own activity, we saw very large disparities for minorities and women in the receipts that those firms make from their firms, as well as the ability to form businesses and to grow those businesses. We also did a review of the literature about discrimination in access to credit. That is something I hear from minority and women firms literally across the country. Probably in the last 5 years, I've easily interviewed over 1,000 people. We do these studies everywhere, and we do these in-depth interviews, and there isn't anybody that hasn't said that money isn't a serious problem. And so credit discrimination is an important element of your study, as well as human capital constraints, ability to access networks, to achieve the educational credentials that are necessary, certainly increasingly, to be successful. All of these factors go into whether or not women and minority-owned firms have full and fair opportunities to compete for your projects. We also did, as we always do, talk to individuals about their experiences with the RTA and getting work with you and with your prime consultants and vendors. We interviewed 26 people for your study. And again, not surprisingly, people told us about discriminatory attitudes, negative perceptions of their abilities to do business, being excluded from networks, and very importantly, I think, not being able to obtain work easily or at all on contracts that do not have goals. There was pretty universal agreement that your program is necessary, it's critical to these firms' survival, and that the firms that will use them on contracts with goals often do not even solicit them on contracts without goals. So what were the study recommendations? And let me back up one. Well, I can't go to a slide probably on this one, but the gentleman was asking about veteran businesses. We certainly did include veteran businesses in our outreach. As Nadine mentioned, the state of Illinois doesn't have a lot of veteran-owned firms on its registry. They're working on outreach there, but there are not a lot there. So we did reach out to the firms that were available. There are, at least up to this point, there may be some efforts in the future, but kind of no national data, no census data, really on veteran-owned businesses in the sense that we need to use it. The VA has some information on service-disabled veterans, but not on just veterans as a group and whether or not they are experiencing problems in obtaining contracts. So I do know the VA has talked about doing some nationwide work on that area, but unfortunately there just really are no data sources for that. Dun & Bradstreet just started adding that as a variable, so perhaps for some future study there may be more data available, but we'll use what's out there today. So going to the recommendations, we certainly suggest that you use the study results to set your FTA goal, which is in the submission that we already went over, as well as your MWDVB, all those alphabets, goal for your non-federally assisted contracts. As I mentioned before, we're recommending that you implement an electronic data collection and monitoring system for your DBE and your MWDVBE programs as well, so that you can collect the data much more easily, get it from the primes more easily. The project managers won't have to be bothered to try to go back and fill in holes, and you'll have a much better idea what you're doing in real time. It also reduces the burdens on your vendors as well. The city, county, everybody else in town now has this system, and so it might be time for RTA to do that as well. One of the things that people said that they would like would be some networking events about specific RTA projects. You do participate in the Transit Symposium, and that's great, but if people either aren't there or whatever, that when you're going to be having any kind of relatively large contract, you're not going to do it for everything, but relatively large contract that you're going to put out, that you have some type of a networking event where the minority women small firms can come in and meet the larger firms, help to form teams and relationships, and let them know about your opportunities. An annual contracting forecast would also be helpful, especially for small firms. It can be difficult to respond quickly when things sort of pop up. And so to the extent that folks know what you might be buying in the future, they can help to plan their own work. They can start to put together teams and networking arrangements well in advance of when the procurements are going to come out. Unbundling contracts, that's just kind of a fancy procurement term for making them smaller, is something else that people mentioned, that sometimes perhaps you might be able to split a contract into one or two separate contracts, or reduce the complexity and scope so that smaller firms can participate more easily. Several of the people we interviewed mentioned experience requirements. Certainly you do specialized work, but perhaps a little bit more flexibility about that might be useful. Taking equivalent experience, maybe they haven't done a planning study exactly for a transit agency, but they've done it for some other type, to just give people a little bit more opportunity to participate. Of course, you're not going to lower your standards in any way, but sort of think about it with an eye to always being as inclusive as you can be. And finally, to think about adopting, like the state of Illinois has, a small business type of target market where you would limit who could submit proposals or bids on small contracts to small firms. It's a way to give small firms opportunities. They don't have to go compete so much against the big boys. Certainly in the depths of the recession, we saw large firms bidding on stuff that they would have turned their nose up when times were good. And so we're still seeing a lot of large firms that are going after relatively small work. So this might be a way to encourage your smaller firms to participate. So that's it for the update on the study. We are still working on the draft. We'll get that to Nadine and her folks. They'll take a look at it. I'm sure they'll have comments, get back to us, and then we'll be back with a final draft when we finish that process.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Colette?
Escape from here.
Director Ross.
Just one question. The data collection and monitoring that you're talking about, is that some kind of a canned package that we could just purchase, or does it have to be designed specifically for our use?
Well, they certainly want, of course, modify it a little bit for your use, but it's off the shelf. And you might actually be able to tag onto one of the other agencies, because I think city, county, park district, CHA, CTA, Metra, I think PACE is thinking about it, and the state all have it now. So you might just be able to jump on somebody else's contract and do it that way.
You should know, Director Ross, that we recently just purchased a vendor system that does a lot of the things that Colette recommends, and we're also working very hard on possibly procuring a new ERP system, and so that may actually have a component that will solve a lot of these issues for us.
Director Lewis.
Colette, in your work, when you interviewed some of the potential suppliers, DBEs and Bs, was there confusion about what the RTA actually has responsibility for spending versus some of the other service agencies? And how did that conversation proceed?
Oh, well, yes, there was. Not as much as I would have thought, to be honest, because I figure if you walk down LaSalle Street and you ask 100 people, 99 of them will be confused about the differences between the service boards and the RTA. But these are pretty sophisticated vendors, and a lot of them had actually done work for you. So they did understand that. But there were some people who were a little confused about that, and they weren't too sure about what you buy versus what the service boards buy. So, certainly one of the things that at least in the past, and I'm assuming will happen again at the Transit Symposium, is that there's an explanation given to people about the various roles that these different transit agencies and transportation agencies perform for Chicago. And that's an important takeaway, I think, for the people that attend the symposium. But yes, there was a little bit, but we were able to clear that up pretty easily.
In looking at the work that you propose, is it suboptimal to look at the RTA only without looking at the other service agencies, since a lot of the money is spent at the service agency level and less at the RTA level? Is there something in your work that might give some view on that?
Well, we did the studies, the availability studies for Metra, PACE, the tollway, the county, and the state. So to that extent, we certainly have a big body now of information about how things work here. And the city probably wouldn't be much different if they ever did do a study. So what we saw is pretty much the same thing across the board about issues about networking, inability to get prime work, how to grow their firms, those kinds of things. So you see a lot of congruence there. But since they each buy somewhat different things, they each have their own federal funding source. We couldn't just add all those together. So I think what you have overall is a pretty solid picture of what happens in the transportation industry in Chicago that I think can guide everybody as they go forward about how to be sure that we're as inclusive as possible.
Director Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for you, Colin. DBEs, minorities, contracting firms, engineering firms, procurement firms. When you're starting off in business, this is a very helpful tool. What happens when that particular DBE or minority firm becomes successful? Is there an exit plan for them to become local contractors, head on with the bigger contractors in their field or their endeavors?
Absolutely, and the federal regulations that govern DBE eligibility and certification are very strict and very explicit about that. When a firm exceeds the Small Business Administration's size standards, then it has to graduate from the program. And there are various size standards for different industries, but that comes from SBA, and RTA has to follow that, as does the entire DBE program. There's also a limit on the personal net worth of the owner of the firm, the disadvantaged individual upon whom certification rests, and so they can't have a personal net worth that exceeds federal guidelines as well. Should either of those two things happen, either you exceed the size standard as a firm, or as an individual, your personal net worth exceeds that level, then you have to graduate from the program. So yes, as people get bigger and are successful, then they do in fact have to graduate from the program. For your locally funded contracts, Nadine mentioned you'll be accepting the city and the county and the state. They also have these same types of graduation requirements. So you can't stay in the program for life. If you get big and successful, you need to graduate, and you will graduate.
And one last question I have too. Is there any quality control measures put in for DBEs, et cetera? I know in my line of work, there are a lot of problems there. Much needed minority firms, mechanical firms, and DBs coming in that had no input, no money, no skin in the game, I should say. So is there some rules with that, or is there any quality control that says you're going to be moved out of here, you're not compliant with rules?
Well, actually, I think you may be thinking of a couple of different things. One of them is, can a particular firm perform on a particular contract? And that's sort of impossible for anybody to say up front. How much work can you take on? What are your financials at any given moment for a particular job? But certainly as part of the process by which you become certified as a DBE, you have to prove that you have the capacity to be in business, that you've done some work in that area, that you have some of the skills that are required. They will go out, they will interview the owner to make sure that that person seems able to manage and control the business. If you're required to have a license, you have to produce that, that kind of thing. So there is some gatekeeping about the basic ability of a firm to do work in the area that they're seeking certification. But on any particular contract, the agency's not vetting people for the primes before they have to go and try to meet a goal. That's where you sit down, you negotiate with your DBE vendors, you see what they can do. The other thing that you mentioned perhaps was some capacity building. How do firms get the skills that they need to be successful? And there are lots of capacity building programs out there. In my judgment, the RTA really doesn't do enough contracting to put the resources together to provide that type of thing itself. But there are lots of assist agencies out there, and there are other organizations that are doing that. For example, the Tollway has a very robust mentor-protege program where a larger firm takes a smaller firm and brings them along and teaches them about the types of things that you're talking about, as well as financing programs so that they aren't just serving as some kind of pass-through or just using their certification to get the work, but they actually, as you say, have some skin in the game, but they have to have some skin to put in it. And so the state has some financing programs, so does the city. There's private sector things going on. So I think the infrastructure is in place to do what I think that you're thinking of.
One last item is, I think some of the problems that do exist is the bonding requirements. I mean, the money is just, to bond out to some of these jobs today, millions and millions of dollars, and that serves a detriment to the DBEs and what have you. It makes it really, really tough.
It does. Bonding I hear everywhere. And of course, bonding is in some sense a financing mechanism, right? I mean, if you can put up the bond or you can put up the cash, and nobody puts up the cash, but it is really a serious problem. There are some good bonding programs out there that have taken small firms to much higher levels. I met a woman, African-American woman contractor in San Francisco, who participated in a program and went from $500,000 to $5 million in bonding capacity. Well, that now makes you seriously competitive. Well, almost in San Francisco, given the cost structures, but you are a lot more competitive than you used to be. And those programs are out there. They're expensive to run because they're very labor intensive, but they are there. And I know the Tollway is in the process of implementing some bonding assistance as well. So, one of the things that is great about the Transit Symposium is that it's an opportunity for people to come and find out what everybody's doing in one place. So while the RTA isn't going to have a bonding program, but if you have a contractor that comes to you or they talk to Latoya or a project manager, they know to say, here's some other resources that are available to you.
Go ahead, Nadine.
I just wanted to address a couple points that Director Buchanan made. One of the ways that we can address one of the issues that you brought up, which is firms graduating out of the program and then what happens to them. I know at one point there was talk at IDOT of including graduated or graduating firms in their mentor protege program. So that's one thing. I don't know if that ever materialized or not. And then the fact that we're now going to include city, state, and county certified firms really should help bridge that gap, because while the DBE income guidelines are at one level, the state guidelines are much, much higher. So a firm that may have graduated from a DBE program may still be included in the state's BEP program. So that kind of helps a little bit. You get to a much bigger level when you're talking about, I don't know what the current standard is at the state. I think it's $75 million in net worth. So that's in my mind, a pretty wealthy and successful individual. So you can kind of bridge that gap by including all the different programs together.
so it might show a little bit of my lack of knowledge here, but when we talk about these programs, how much flexibility do we have to structure our goals differently than just saying, 10% or 12%? And like, how much flexibility do we have? So, for example, one of the things that's always been troubling to me is we always talk about these programs as being, a subcontractor type relationship. So are we able to say, you know what, we'll have a goal for that, but we're also going to have a goal for, how much we're going to do with minority and women firms where they are the prime. Okay, and can we come up with goals like that and hold ourselves accountable for that, even though it may not be federally, state, or city required? How much flexibility do we have if we're going to be really thoughtful about this, to do this in a way that really makes an impact?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think the first thing to note is that the program is not just for subcontracting as they stand today. The federal program and the regs are very clear. They cover prime and subcontracts. So you have an obligation to FTA for all the dollars that you get from them, regardless of whether they went to primes or subs.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, and I get that, I'm talking about having some specificity, because I think the reality here is that it is mostly subs, and that's been the general practice.
That's really true. Yeah.
And so can we move ourselves beyond that and think about establishing something for us that's different, and have we crossed a line in some way if we did that?
Okay, I'm following what you're saying now. In other words, could you say on a contract that there has to be X percentage of prime DBE participation? At least in my own personal view, unfortunately, the answer to that probably is no. The courts have taken goals that are requiring prime participation, and they've treated them as quotas, because the only way that you can meet it then is you must be a minority-owned firm in order to get that piece of the work. In fact, the original Adirondack case that sent us down this whole road back in 1995 was, in fact, a prime contractor set-aside that the Supreme Court struck down. So we have tended to believe that that's just not going to be defensible in federal court. Now, would they work? Yes, that would work, but they've taken that off our table. So one other option which I'll go back to one of our recommendations, was to talk about, at least think about, a small business set-aside. You can't do it on the basis of race, but you could do it on the basis of size and location. So we can't say we're all going to have a contract where only minorities and women could get those dollars, but you could say we're going to have a contract for small, local firms. The state of Illinois has had the small business set-aside program, it's got to be at least a decade now, where they set aside procurements only for bidding or proposals by small Illinois-based businesses. We haven't been challenged on that. To the best of my knowledge, there have been no successful challenges to small business-type set-asides. The federal government has had them for 25 years, so that is kind of a workaround. It doesn't hit it directly, but given that the DBEs, the minority-owned firms and whatnot, will be small by definition, and they will tend to be local, it's kind of a way to hit the target. It's a little bit more of a scattershot, but it's certainly better than nothing.
Colette hit the nail on the head. We actually have an approved small business set-aside program here that we are planning to pilot in 2017. So I think that's going to go a long way toward helping our participation as well, without being in violation of federal law.
And I think you have some real opportunities here, because so much of the work that you do is professional services. And you can be a smaller firm now. We're pretty little, and we work all over the country. And so, the need for big staffs is less now with the technology. And so if it's a planning contract and it's $200,000, small planning firms can handle that in a minute. but they're going to have a lot of trouble competing against the big planning firms, both because of the experience requirements, the depth of staff. So I think for folks that do professional services, you've got a lot more flexibility than if you did a lot of hard bid construction where it's low bid and that's kind of it.
Great. Anything else?
Well, thank
Colette,
you.
thank you so much. It's
See you soon again.
we're
All right.
blessed to have the best at what you do. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, moving along, we have some items, consent items as they appear on the board agenda. The first is item 7, which 7A is an ordinance approving the Section 5310 Enhanced Mobility for Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities Program of Projects. Leanne or any of the staff, you have anything to add to that, since we had an update earlier this morning? So are there any questions or comments? If not, can I have a motion and a second on this? Director Ross moves that we approve the ordinance as it is in 7A and seconded by Director Friga. Is there leave for the attendance roll call? Seeing no objection, leave is granted.
16 ayes.
Thank you. Item 8 is the approval of contract and procurement items as they appear on the board agenda, and these items include 8A, which is an ordinance approving a contract for CTA Wayside Energy Storage Assessment. Staff have anything to add to that?
No, there was a memo in the packet. If anyone had any questions, we could answer them.
I do have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Mr. Director Hobson.
My question is, this has been done by 2 other service boards across the country, I believe LA and SEPTA. What are their results? Was this a positive ROI investment by those 2 agencies?
I can respond to that. So SEPTA, which is Philadelphia's transit system, they, first of all, what we're asking for your approval of is just an assessment, a cost benefit for CTA to see if this is going to be a cost benefit investment. But SEPTA, and as you said, Director Hobson, LA Metro have done this. SEPTA partnered with their state energy agency and actually received a grant for them to pay for that, so it was no cost to SEPTA. They're also seeing reduced energy costs and savings in that. Similar situation with LA Metro. They paid for the systems and they're receiving savings of about $99,000 per year.
Can I answer your question, Blake?
Not quite. So they're saving $99,000 a year. What did it cost to implement the system?
So the installation cost was $3.6 million a year. And so similar with most kind of energy savings programs, you'll see the savings over a series of years. So from their perspective, it is going in a good direction because they are seeing that, but we'll continue to follow that.
But if they're saving $99,000 a year and they had to spend $3.6 million, that's a 36-year payback. Is that correct?
So the LA Metro system, and I have a limited understanding of this, is a smaller installation of this program. For SEPTA's program, it's a much larger one, and the payout that they have is again in partnership with the energy company. So again, with what we're trying to do here with partnering with CTA is to make sure that there is a good return on investment if we move forward with this.
Well, I guess I would like to take a look at what has happened at those other 2 agencies and see if there is any positive payback from either of those ventures before we commit $200,000 for a study. So I would propose that we table this until we have better data.
Well, I think that's sort of part of the point of the analysis that we're going to do to actually assess this locally. The studies both at SEPTA and in Philly, and Philly's probably a better example because it's a bigger, older system than ours. They have both shown some positive returns on those investments already. LA's, we had more specifics. Director Hobson asked us some of these questions sort of later yesterday, and so we are trying to gather a little bit more data. Oh,
Is
there
there
is
any
someone here
reason-
from CTA that could answer some more specific questions if you had them. I guess I would suggest that that's sort of the very point of this study. This isn't to implement any program. It's also state monies from the state planning funds that we did for greening our transit. And I'm blanking on what specifically the grant was named, but the point was we did our green transit plan, and then from there, some of those monies were then meant to be allocated towards testing, piloting, assessing some programs. This is one of those programs. So the point of this spend of state grant monies that we won't get to use them otherwise is to actually do such analysis. And so we could ask CTA if they had any additional comments to add.
Is there any issue with delaying this a month?
I guess my response is we can definitely get more information, but again, to reiterate what Leanne said, the point of the study is to kind of capture that information.
No, I do understand that, but why spend $200,000 if both results were negative?
I guess I disagree that they were negative.
Well, one is a 36-year payback. Nobody would make that kind of an investment. And we don't know what the other one is.
So perhaps I misspoke. I didn't mean that they've seen $99,000 worth of savings. I think that they anticipate for more increased savings. I think it's just getting up and running. So I guess I wouldn't annualize that number.
Okay,
And it's just
well,
that
so it sounds like information is sketchy at best, and that's why I would push for a month's delay, giving staff the opportunity to identify more information.
Jessica, you have anything to add back there?
Only that, Director Hobson, that's a good question that CTA wants to answer, and I think that's why we're doing the study. We have Pete Ballard here from the CTA. He can share a couple of words about the study and what they plan to do with the information from it. I think it would be helpful for him to share that.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So if you can indulge me for a minute, I'd like to just give a little background on what the technology is and then why we're interested in it. So energy storage is exactly what it sounds like. You're storing electricity for later use. The Shedd Aquarium is the local institution that has done a large-scale project of this. They've just turned it on, I think, within the last year. They've got solar panels on their roof, and when they're not using the solar panels, electricity from the solar panels immediately, they put it into their storage unit for later use. And that's been a very successful project for them. The reason CTA is interested in it is for a couple reasons. One, we have our new 5000 series rail cars, 714 of them, with regenerative braking. They're great because when they brake, they feed energy back into our third rail, and if there's another car accelerating at the same time, it can take up that energy and use it to propel forward. So we like that. As they were saying, that's why it saves money on energy. On the revenue side, there's also revenue coming in from it. So we take for granted that when we flip the switch, the lights turn on, but behind that is perhaps the world's largest and one of the most complex machines ever built, which is the grid that keeps the lights on for the entire northeast of America. They are required to exactly balance how much electricity is being used with how much is being supplied. And if it's off, they will actually pay people with storage devices to either take up energy or turn it off. And that happens, signals every 2 seconds. The grid operators will actually pay people to do so. So in answer to the board member's question, when we first looked at this in 2010, we found the payback period to be 170 years. When we went out last year and asked vendors for their proposals, just for information purposes, not for solicitation, we had some responses where the groups of vendors, the consortium of vendors, would do it at no cost to us. So in terms of payback, we're getting the system at no cost to us, plus a revenue stream, plus energy savings. Now that's what the vendor said, and we could take that as great news and that they're promising the world and then go out and do it. We don't want to do that. We want to take a more deliberate approach, which is why we're proposing this study. So what would this do? The big questions are, where do you put them? SEPTA has done They did 2, now they're rolling out another 7 or 9, I believe. LA has different technology, which I can talk about if you're interested, but the SEPTA model is really what we're looking at. They've found that they had a large grant to implement the initial ones, but they're working on self-financing the other ones. So what this study would do is send our engineering firm out and do studies by the sides of the track to see what the optimal location for these would be, where the payback is as soon as possible. So we're very grateful for the RTA's assistance along the way. They've spent a lot of time, we spent a lot of time designing the scope for this, so it gets us exactly what we want. Going forward for this study, we'll have a joint CTA RTA steering committee that's guiding the study, and when it's done in a couple months, we'll have a recommendation to our leadership and back to you whether the ROI is sufficient enough to justify the cost. But we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't think it had a lot of positives going for it. Any questions?
Director Hobson, you have any questions?
No, I just think that it would be prudent of us to see what the results at SEPTA were and what they are in LA. I'm not against this at all. It sounds great on paper, but you know, the one study that the CTA did said 170-year payback. The approximate numbers that we were kicking around before from Jill were 36-year payback. Those are extremely long time horizons, and I'd like to get a better grasp of that before we spend $200,000 on a study for something that may not pay back.
Right, so the 170 years was 5 years ago. The technology has tremendously advanced since then. And what I point out again is
So
the vendors that proposed to do this were willing to do it at no cost to us. So it was an immediate ROI for us of whenever they got it running. And then past that, it would be energy savings and revenue. So the 36-year payback is not anywhere near what SEPTA has. And we've had numbers of conversations with them on the phone. What I remember talking to them about is a 5 to 7 year payback, but I can get that exact number for you. As the technology improves, each new unit gets better and better ROI. So we can delay it. I would argue against it because we've given this a lot of thought. We've been very deliberate about it. There's a great opportunity. Implementation will take some time because it's complicated, and we want to know as soon as possible whether it is a positive benefit for us, because if it is, we want to start saving the money and getting the revenue as fast as possible. So we think we have a really well-designed study, and we've created the study and the scope in concert with SEPTA. We've been on the phone with them a number of times, and they've actually guided how we've set it up. So I would say we have a deliberate approach. We've been working on it for a long time, and if it's positive, we should do it soon because then we can get the benefits sooner.
Director Pang.
Yeah, I feel like that's what the study is to do, to answer any open questions, and that it's very thought out by people with a lot of expertise on this. And I also feel in this kind of field, where I'm certainly not at all qualified, that these technologies are moving very, very fast, and the prudent, forward-thinking thing to do is to push on studies like this. And it sounds to me like once the 36-year payback was qualified, clarified, that what you're doing next is to determine what the vendors spot on what they're telling you, and to actually codify that for us and come back.
Yeah, we're always concerned. I'm sorry.
No, my understanding is this is a study to provide locations, optimal locations for the wayside storage systems.
Correct, and to evaluate the payback period of the optimal locations.
It's both. Were there questions on this side of the boardroom?
Well, let me just say, I think Director Hobson's broader point is a good one. Obviously, before there's any implementation here, somebody's got to do the numbers. It's got to make sense. and I assume that'll be done. I take it without this storage and without this regeneration, what, the electricity just goes off into the ether and is lost?
So this is where I need to qualify that I got a D in physics in high school. But my best understanding is just like a Toyota Prius. So when a Toyota Prius, the electric car, breaks, it creates friction, which creates heat, which is converted to electricity, which charges the battery. So the same principle works in this case. If the electricity is not taken up by another accelerating train, then my engineers tell me it dissipates through the resistors as heat. So that's a little bit more complicated way of saying the energy that we could be using is wasted, right? And the same principle applies where if there's not an accelerating train at the same time, then it's wasted. So that's the opportunity there, is to capture that electricity that is being wasted now.
Okay, well, I think this is worth taking a good look at, but again, the numbers are going to have to make sense at the end.
We absolutely agree.
You know, and do go back and tell my counterpart Terry Peterson, your chairman in Dorval, we had questions, and go back and and Director Hobson's comments are well taken. So go back and really tell them the RTA had serious concerns about our ROI on this stuff. Yes, Director Buchanan.
Yeah, just a question here. How much subsidy is this vendor getting for this product? I mean, the way you're talking about these panels across certain areas of our system, are they paying for all the installation? Are they paying for the startup? Are they paying for the engineering? Are they paying for everything?
So that is one model. There are hybrids where the call it the host agency will take on some of the costs, or it can be entirely financed by the vendor. So the reason that they're willing to do it at no cost to agencies is because of this revenue stream that comes from the grid for the unit to be turned off and turned on at 2-second intervals, because that has tremendous value to them. The grid operators are willing to pay the vendors, and that's what allows them to finance the cost of that over a number of years.
They're taking our electric energy that we're paying for and reselling it back to the market, right? And then this way, we have our solar panels and it's regenerating, and we're not losing that heat, which is going to heat.
Right, there are a couple different models. In that case, we're getting all the energy savings. The SEPTA model is they actually divide up the revenue from the grid operators, so that in addition, SEPTA gets some of the revenue coming back from that. But it's still enough to incent the vendors to put it in and do it over a longer period of time. Now, they did get grant funding to do it, right? It's one of the reasons we want to do the feasibility study, is to see how much the value is of that revenue, and that will give a vendor or vendors who are bidding an idea of, can they finance it?
So we're basically losing, just off the top of my head, millions of dollars in electrical cost to the RTA, and they're reclaiming it, selling it elsewhere, because we're putting this new system somewhere.
No, they're not reclaiming it, because there's no storage. There's no storage unit to replace it. No, they can't. It's just wasted. It's pure wasted. I mean, that's the opportunity. Is it's an asset out there that's just being wasted overall. They don't get it. We don't get it. That's why you do the battery storage, and in order to incent someone to do it, they have to get part of the revenue stream. But SEPTA has also realized part of that revenue stream as well, in addition to the energy savings, which is purely theirs. So it's a partnership. It's definitely a partnership, and I think it can be a partnership that works for all parties involved.
So again, I think at this point, staff would recommend that the board move forward on this. That's the staff recommendation. I think, and just to finally clarify, I mean, the point, this before you today is a contract for a study to do all that analysis, to be able to answer some of the questions, so they can look at different models, so they could actually look to potentially implement a program that could generate either energy savings and energy cost savings, as well as potential revenue. And we don't know where anybody would fall on that spectrum yet until such analysis is done. So that's where we stand today.
I'll move adoption of the ordinance.
Second.
It was moved by Director Trioni that we adopt this ordinance. It was seconded by, by Director Anthony Anderson. And I do want to remind folks, this morning we heard a study in one of our committees that part of our long-term duties is to, we have a green obligation, I guess is the right way to put it. When Director Colson or Director Buchanan were asking that question, as my grandmother would say, it would go poof back into the environment with no use. We do have a broader mandate here, which is to as a public body try to promote green technology. I mean, it is one of our bigger. It is a mandate of ours. Let's put it that way. But do go back. I mean, you've heard our concerns and express them with the CTA. You guys are tremendous partners with us, and I have confidence that you're going to get a return on investment that's going to be good for everybody in our region. So, with that, you want a roll call, Director Hobson?
No, that's all right.
Okay. You can have one if you want one.
No, that's okay.
So, but and you're in the minutes. So,
I'd like a roll call.
Director Friga wants a roll call. So let's take a roll call. We do. We have a motion and a second by Director Anderson that we adopt this 8A ordinance. Madam Secretary, take the roll, please.
Okay, Director Anderson.
Yes.
Director Buchanan.
Yes.
Director Colson.
Yes.
Director DeWitt.
Yes.
Director Durrani.
Yes.
Director Frega.
No.
Director Fuentes.
Yes.
Director Higgins.
Yes.
Director Hobson.
Yes.
Director Lewis.
Yes.
Director McGallis.
Yes.
Director Melvin.
Yes.
Director Pang.
Yes.
Director Ross. Director Troiani.
Yes.
Chairman Dillard.
You're a trooper, Director Hobson.
15 ayes and 1
your
nay.
comments are memorialized, and we appreciate it, Blake. I don't want any member of this board ever to not ask questions and ask hard questions like Director Hobson did today and on a regular basis. And I don't want anybody ever to feel they're obligated to vote one way if they want to be memorialized in a different way. So with that, it is passed as the Secretary has stated the vote, and I appreciate it. And thank you very much to CTA.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I'd be happy to answer any follow-up questions from individual board members, both now and later. And certainly, as we get the results, we'll share them with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Last but not least is the resolution that sets the regular RTA board meeting dates for 2017. It's hard to believe it's going to be 2017. Are there any comments or questions? Get them in your iPhone like I just put them in yesterday. Can I have a motion to adopt this? Director DeWitt moves that we adopt our dates for next year, seconded by Director Michael Lewis. Is there leave for the attendance roll call? Seeing no objection, leave is granted.
16 ayes and no absent.
Thank you, Audrey. Item 10 is new business. Any new business to come before the board today? If not, I want to remind everybody that the next board meeting is Thursday, November 17th, starting with committees as normal at 8:30 in the morning, followed by the board meeting itself. If there's no further business to come before the public portion of this board meeting, I entertain a motion and a second to adjourn. Director Durrani says we should adjourn, and he's made that motion, seconded by Director Pang. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.